is Big Play Detroit. I am Chris Castellani. We got Austin Sisler on the sticks for what should be an exciting episode of Big Play Detroit. Thank you very much for tuning in after a mixed bag of Detroit sports this week. And the thing we're going to start off with, which is probably the most important sporting event of the weekend, was sadly a pretty massive disappointment. No way around it. And we are going to talk about the Red Hot Tigers in segment number 2. But we got to start by talking about the Detroit Pistons, the one-seeded playoff-bound Detroit Pistons that just finished playing game 1 of the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Now, I talked last week, obviously, the play-in was still going on, so we did not have an exact idea of who the Pistons were going to be playing. That all got decided, and it's very strange because it seemed like most people wanted, I don't know if it was the prediction, but it seemed like most people wanted Pistons Hornets. And from a pure entertainment standpoint, given what had happened over several months ago with the fight, the brawl against Diabate and everything, would have probably been the more entertaining series. But coming into this series, the Pistons ended up drawing the Orlando Magic in that 8-seed spot. And look, after game 1, you're already behind the 8 ball. Magic go into Little Caesars Arena. First time the Pistons have ever hosted a playoff series. They win by a final score of 112 to 101. I'll spend most of the segment talking about this. Look, ever since we got this gig, and even before that, but especially with this show, I try to do as much research as possible into all the sports that we talk about. And look, I am surprised. I'm not going to open by acting like I saw this coming. I didn't. But looking into what I looked into with the Magic, this is not your typical 8 seed. For one, they've had a lot of injuries, and that can potentially derail a season. And this is a 45-win ball club, and I think it just goes to show how much parity there is in the NBA now. Back in the day, 45-loss teams snuck into the postseason. Like, this is a legitimate club with some pieces. They've had some injuries. Now, they struggled a little bit offensively, but they have size at the perimeter. They have a lot of length. I mean, any team that has any team that has Franz Wagner playing on the wings, you're going to have a fair amount of length, fair amount of, height at that position. Pretty good perimeter defense going up against a team in Detroit that's not exactly known for their shooting abilities, but they've struggled a little bit offensively. They've done most of their offense based on what I read in the half court for the most part this year. Pistons were a team that prides themselves on physicality, on out-rebounding you, on being tougher than you. And while a lot of things went wrong in this game, the thing that stood out to me was I felt like Detroit got out-toughed. I mean, I think the biggest discrepancy is the fact that you had a +6 rebounding margin in favor of the Orlando Magic. And when I look at this game, and now when you take a step back and look at this series, look, are the Pistons going to win this series? I would still say yes. Traditional, look, this is a team that I feel like every time we've wondered if they're going to take steps back, they just end up taking more steps forward. You are absolutely capable of losing this series. And normally I wouldn't say that about a 1-8 matchup in these playoffs. I complain all the time about the fact that I think the NBA playoffs are kind of bloated to begin with. This is different. And I came away from game 1 not so much worried for the Detroit Pistons, but more so concerned about the Orlando Magic. I thought they played a brilliant game. And I know that obviously with this being a Detroit show, I could come on here and nitpick all the things that went wrong. And they were particularly graceful with the basketball, 14 turnovers. Cade Cunningham, while going for, 39 points, I think he would argue not his most efficient game, 4 turnovers or 3 turnovers to 4 assists. Like, there's improvements that need to be made. He did come alive in the fourth quarter and was great. But I think one of the biggest things to point to is the fact that the Pistons all year have been a team that has relied on their depth, and they've gotten good minutes off their bench. The only guy coming off your bench that scored more than 3 points for you was Dennis Jenkins, who knocked down a 3-pointer and some free throws. He had 6 points. Besides that, nobody really contributed much. And in this game, and this is where I have to give a ton of credit to Orlando, there were 10 to a dozen times in which Orlando had a solid lead. The Pistons cut into it, and at one point, I think even tied the game at 65. But whether they got into that 0 to 5 point range, right? 1 to 5 point range in terms of deficit. And every single time the Pistons had momentum, the Magic responded. And I think that is a reflection of the fact that despite the fact they're an 8 seed, despite the injuries they've had, and despite the fact that, look, Paolo Banchero, who is their guy that they've, based their future around, is somebody that people have had, some doubts about over the last year or so. He's been a little bit inconsistent. This is a team with some experience. They've been in the playoffs recently. They had a knockdown drag-out series a few years back in the first round against Cleveland where Franz Wagner laid an egg in Game 7. Similar to what he did in the Elite Eight against UCLA, not to throw shade, but he totally came alive in this game against Detroit, especially in the fourth quarter. They were poised. They were the better team. They were the less sloppy team. And I felt like down low in the interior, they were tougher than a lot of people expected them to be. And do I think the Pistons going a full week without playing had some impact? I think in the early part of the game, for sure. I think that when you're hosting a home playoff series, and this is uncharted territory for this team, I know that they played home playoff games a year ago, but you are now, the top dog in this conference. They came out kind of sluggish. They came out kind of slow. No one was really knocking down shots, and that kind of, unfortunately, throughout the game, carried over as they got deeper into this thing. The Magic were getting stops and the Pistons were missing shots. And Detroit, for a team that has graded out to be one of the better defensive units in the NBA all season, down the stretch, Franz Wagner took over. In the early part of the game, you had Jalen Suggs, who played really well. So it's a frustrating loss for a Pistons team that I think came into this postseason with a whole lot of momentum. Obviously, 60 wins, Cade having this transcendent season, but yeah, here's what I'll say, and we got a lot of series left. I'm not burying the Pistons. I'm not saying that this thing is over. Okay? It's one game in a best-of-7 series. The thing about best-of-7 game series, especially in the NBA more than probably any other sport, the best team wins these series. This is not a one-and-done situation like in the NCAA tournament. This is not like baseball where you play a 162-game marathon schedule, and then if you have a bad week, you could be out in a best-of-5 game series. Like, talent ultimately rises to the top. I think that will ultimately happen in this series, but I, coming into this, would have predicted Pistons in 6. I'm now going to say Pistons in 7. And it's kind of ironic, just on a personal level, because I think the first Pistons playoff series I ever watched was 2003. The Pistons were the 1 seed going up against the 8-seeded Orlando Magic. They were down 3-1 in that series. Doc Rivers, the coach at the time for the Magic, they were down 3-1 in that series and had to go to Orlando for Game 6 to win when Tracy McGrady was, if not the best scorer, a top 3 scorer in the world. Pistons ultimately ended up losing in the Eastern Conference Finals to the, at the time, New Jersey Nets, led by Jason Kidd that year, obviously 0-4 the next year. They won the whole thing. I bring that up because I think we're going to have a similar thing here. I think it's a much different caliber of Magic team. I think that team was just completely run by T-Mac. I think there's a little bit more balance here, but anyone expecting this to be your easy kind of breeze in the first round, they I think, got rudely awoken in this Game 1 against the Magic. And regardless of how this thing ends, I do still favor the Pistons. These games matter in this playoff format. And this is going to sound like a very simple thing to say, but in these early series, you want to try to limit the number of games that you play. You want to be fresh by the time you get to the conference finals, by the time you get to the NBA finals, because it is such a slog, such a grind. If you make it to the finals and play in the finals, you are in the playoffs for 2 months. I mean, that's a chunk of the season. So to be able to lose Game 1 and kind of already put yourself behind the 8 ball, Orlando, at least for the time being, recaptures home court. It's a frustrating loss. There was nothing I saw that I felt like was insurmountable, but I think considering the expectations and considering the way the Pistons had played throughout this season, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. I think any loss in the playoffs, you could argue, is concerning, but for it to be a 1-8 matchup where it felt like LCA was going to be rocking, and it was, Magic stole their chain, and now the Pistons have to figure out a way to get back. So, tough first game loss to the Magic here to start these playoffs. We'll be back in segment number 2, and Austin will join in segment 2 as we talk about the Red Hot Tigers, who had a marvelous week. Like I said, mixed bag this week in Detroit sports, but Tigers, red hot, above 500. They were 7-9, I believe, the last time that we talked to you. So great week for the Tigers. We'll be right back to discuss all of that. Okay, we are back for segment number 2, continuing to move around the mitten as we talk about our Detroit Tigers, who had a marvelous week. As I teased at the end of last segment, 7-9 at the end of last week following a sweep of the Miami Marlins. They leave this week 12-10. It is worth noting, and I talked about this with you, Austin, before the show, just to make sure that everyone is up to speed. The Tigers have an 11 a.m. start time on Monday against the Boston Red Sox. Last game of this series, Boston Marathon Monday. I didn't know. I knew they played a game on this day. I don't remember Boston having an 11 a.m. start time on the day of the Boston Marathon, but hey, to each their own. It's kind of a unique opportunity. So I don't know when this is going to be uploaded, but just for the sake of transparency, there's a chance that by the time you're listening to this or watching this, that game has already been played. But a great, great week for the Tigers. They go 5-1. They sweep the series in Kansas City, a miraculous late inning victory. One of the craziest games that you're going to see at Comerica Park this season, a 10-9 back and forth affair in that last game of that series where they blew a lead and then they got the lead back and then they were down to their final strike, and Riley Green had arguably the most clutch hit maybe of his career, followed up by Colt Keith, who had a walk-off in the previous two games. I'm kind of working backwards here. They were close pitchers duels until the 8th inning when the Tigers came alive against a Royals bullpen that a team that just got swept by the Yankees. I mean, they are in serious trouble right now. Them and the Mets currently the two worst records in Major League Baseball. Those are two teams that came into the season with legitimate expectations. And then you go to Boston and you've won 2 of the first 3 in this series. The only one that you lost, a 1-0 extra inning game, where you got walked off by Boston at Fenway Park, which was another pitcher's duel, this time between Ranger Suarez and Casey Mize, where, and I tweeted it out, you got arguably the best start of Casey Mize's career. And while I'm not a believer necessarily in moral victories, I think the fact that this pitching staff, the starting staff, even with the injuries, just continues to roll. And that's the main thing that I want to focus on, because we spend so much time talking about the offense. And I think one of the reasons for that is, one, why did they fall apart last season? Well, the offense wasn't productive down the stretch, and they didn't hit with runners in scoring position in the playoffs, and I understand us focusing on that coming into this season, right? But secondly, I think there's a general belief that with Chris Fetter at the helm and with the staff that they have, that the pitching more often than not is going to kind of figure itself out. And I think that generally speaking, since A.J. Hinch has been the manager here with Chris Fetter as the pitching coach, that's been the case. I would argue when you look at what they've done over the last week and when you look at, the way they went out and spent money this offseason, this is not just a pitching staff capable of figuring things out. This is a pitching staff that is completely capable of dominating. I mean, you look at this week alone, you got 2 great Tarek Skubal starts. You got 2 great Framber Valdez starts. You had a really good Casey Mize start. Cater, while giving up several runs there towards the end of his outing, still pitched into the 7th inning. You have Jack Flaherty, who's looking a lot better. The truth is, we focus on the offense because all the fan base is asking for is for the offense to be acceptable. This is not a team. Now, they had that wild game against Kansas City, right? This is not a team that's going to need to score 10 runs to win. I think you look at the Saturday game, they put 4 on the board for Tarek in Boston. And at that point, there was a little bit of traffic, but you felt pretty good about it because not only was the starting pitching great, but you feel good with this bullpen. This is right now, knock on wood, a relatively complete staff, which is kind of remarkable considering the fact that Verlander had 1 start then got injured. Olsen is going to be out for the year. Melton hasn't come back yet. Job hasn't come back yet. For them to be moving along the way that they have, I think just shows the depth that has been built here, but also the fact that, look, money talks. They spent money on Framber for a reason. He was freaking great on Sunday. Skubal, the $32 million arbitration, continues to show why he's the best pitcher in the world, even though I still don't know if we've seen the best version of Tarek this year, which is scary. So I come away from this week super optimistic. You're 4-9, obviously, after that disastrous series in Minnesota. And this team, and I saw Scott Bentley talked about this, and I think he's right. For all the criticisms and concerns and flaws that we have, and they wear them on their sleeve, this is a group that's going to scratch and claw till the very end. They play all 27 outs, and that's on the pitching side, and that's on the offensive side as well. So much better, more fundamental baseball that we saw from the Tigers, a dominant run by this pitching staff. I think this is now 7 games in a row in which they've had their starter go at least 5+ innings. And I think outside of the Cater start, every single one of those featured their starter giving up 1 run or fewer. So that's a formula for success. Austin, I'm going to reel you in here. If you have anything to add about this pitching staff, I know we were talking about Casey Mize a little bit off the air, but is there anything you've seen that because there were expectations, obviously. Is there anything you've seen from the staff so far that is surprising you relative to the expectations we had?
Well, Casey Mize would be the one that's surprising me. Cater Montero as well, but obviously he got roughed up a little bit in his last outing. But Casey Mize is a guy that, I mean, he was an all-star last season, but he wasn't necessarily living up to, that 1-1 hype. He wasn't necessarily, like a Paul Skeens type of guy. And his first year in the bigs was that COVID year. So he's, a veteran at this point. And I kind of thought we were at a point where like we knew what he was. Good, solid pitcher, gonna eat innings, gonna mostly keep you in games for the most part. But that was about it. And he'd kind of really struggled over the years with that splitter, which coming out of college was supposed to be his pitch, right? That was supposed to be the put away pitch, the one that all of the scouts raved about. And it didn't seem like it was really there. But so far this season, like it looks like he is progressing and still developing. And like development doesn't stop once you get to the big leagues, but usually, you get like a couple years into the big leagues and then you kind of know what a guy is at that point. And I thought we were there with Casey Mize, and maybe we are. Maybe, he throws a few more starts and he kind of reverts back to his old ways. But I've been very impressed with the way that he's pitched so far. Because, like, with Scooble and Valdez, we know what they are. They're absolutely dominant when they're on. But considering the fact that we have those two at the head of this rotation, you've got a good solid vet in Jack. Same with Verlander when he comes back. And you've just got such a deep rotation. I mean, Cater Montero wasn't even in the big leagues to start this season,
Right.
right? And you mentioned guys like Olson, who's going to be out for the year. Melton's not back yet. Job isn't back yet. And like, regardless of the injuries that we face or the struggles that we might have with this pitching staff, like we're constantly going to be able to dip into the minor leagues or the bullpen or whatever it is, and there's just so much talent and so much depth here that I feel like we might hit the dog days of summer at one point, and some of these guys might be getting worn down or whatever, but there's always going to be that next man up. There's always going to be someone you can turn to, and they're going to be able to help energize this team. So obviously I still have some concerns about the offense. Torque is struggling here, and we don't. I've said it over and over again. I don't think we have that fear bat. Although McGonigal looks incredible, and I do think the core is starting to shape up and look more so like McGonigal, Dingler, and Colt Keith more so than Green, Torque, and Carpenter, which is an interesting development. But outside of that, I think we're at a point where, they were tied for the worst record in baseball at one point earlier in this season. A lot of fans were freaking out. 162 game season. That's what I said when we did a show at that point. I think everyone just needed to take a step back, take a deep breath in. And, now we're at this point where they're over 500. They had a perfect homestand. They're playing well in Boston. And, they might not be the favorite in the American League. There are, some good teams in the American League, but I think we're at a point where they're just going to take this momentum and run with it. And I really think they're going to run away with this division.
Yeah, so far so good. Obviously, I should have brought this up earlier, but I want to give you some credit. You talked about the fact that the Tigers need to lock down their young core now. Well, this week we got some wonderful news. Kevin McGonigal, 8 years. Clearly, Scott Harris listening to the podcast. Thank you very much for your viewership. 8 years, 155, could get up to 165 million with incentives for Kevin McGonigal. I did a whole video and breakdown of that, but you're just keeping it short. Great, wonderful, awesome. Will probably end up being one of the more team-friendly contracts in sports. You can make the argument the guy is already the best pure hitter on this team. The last thing I want to add, because you brought up, what happens when we get into the dog days of summer. Last year, I would say, I'm not going to say it's the reason, but something that saved this pitching staff down the stretch and into the playoffs a year ago was the usage of Troy Melton, both in that starting role and in that long relief role. Austin, the game you and I were at, game 4, he comes out of the pen, delivers 3 scoreless frames. He was brilliant. I think there's a legitimate chance, assuming, things go well, that Jackson Jobe finds himself in that role this year because you know there's going to be an innings limit coming back from Tommy John. You also know that it's going to be his first time on a mound in whatever 15 months or something. He's going to be gassed up and ready to go. I think there's a chance, and we'll see. Ask me again in the summertime. There's a chance there's a legit secret weapon there with the tall righty coming back from Tommy John, because that's the thing. Life moves very fast, and we have a tendency to forget about these guys. But this was probably, if not the most hyped, maybe the second most hyped pitching prospect in all of baseball, in a system that has shown an ability to develop talent, including pitching. So just something to look forward to, but a great, great week for the Tigers. It is also draft week in the NFL, and we will be back in segment number 3. We're going to preview the Detroit Lions' potential draft. What moves are they going to make in what is a very important draft for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell? We'll be right back. All right, segment number 3. It is a time for some draft talk. I'm here with Austin Sisler. And look, I feel like I go on this diatribe every single year. Lions picking 17th in the NFL draft in 2026. But I feel like I go on this diatribe every year. I'm not the biggest draft guy. Now, what I mean by that, I'm not saying the NFL draft isn't important. I would argue it's, in terms of your future, it's probably the most important days, more important than any game days, quite frankly, in terms of just assembling of your roster. Like a GM makes his bones based on how they draft and develop. I'm not one of those Mel Kipers. I'm not one of those guys that sits down, looks at draft charts. Oh, this is what this guy's 40 time was. This is how this guy looked at the combine. Oh, this guy got in trouble off the field. Like, I leave that in charge of the experts. So, Austin, I am in a second going to toss over to you about like maybe some individual guys that would be best suited for the Lions. I'll just say, based on the picks that they have coming up in this draft, a lot of people point to edge, and I think that's fair, and I'm not going to turn down the opportunity to add an edge rusher. To me, I will view this draft as a disappointment if you don't come away from it with at least some secondary help. Now, I understand there's no guarantee that what you draft is going to be great. I mean, Terrion Arnold was a first-round pick, and prior to all the nonsense that's gone down with him, I mean, we weren't sure if he was any good or not. I hate to bring up, sort subjects, but remember Jeff Okudah getting drafted 3rd overall. Like, that, nothing is guaranteed. At the same time, that is a group, a core that you have seen decimated with injuries. And I think that even at full health, we've seen them in certain instances, especially in those playoff games, get gashed. Now, you could put that on the lack of pass rush as well. It's a chicken or the egg thing, like which one is really to blame. But the fact is, I don't care how good you are. I don't care how much depth you have. Going into next season without most likely a healthy Kirby Joseph and without Brian Branch for an extended period of time, you need to add depth. I'm not saying these guys need to step in right away and be gangbusters, lockdown corners, but I need you to add in the secondary because I just feel like that's the position that's the group that's just been the most depleted. Edge rusher, something that's obviously been talked about. There's been certain players, including that kid from Auburn, that people are saying the Lions may have. I guess I'll toss it over to you now here, Austin, in terms of like, who are some of the individual pieces potentially that you feel like will be best suited in Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell's system?
Yeah, so first I have to admit, most seasons I'm all in on this. I know like just about, every position, who are the top names, who should we be looking at. But I wasn't expecting the Lions to be in this position where they needed to fill so many needs. I mean, Michigan State sucked, so I wasn't that interested in college football, and the Lions were stacked, and I assumed they were going to the playoffs. So I was not invested in all this draft stuff. So like I'm kind of, late to the jump here, but I've been looking into some stuff, and so far from what I've seen, I've seen that apparently the Lions are as high on filling their edge rusher need as they are their offensive tackle need. That's kind of the priority right now. And I definitely wouldn't be surprised at all if Brad Holmes wound up trading up in the draft or trading down. But my thing with edge rusher is usually, and this isn't always the case, of course, and Brad is very able to find hidden gems in the draft, but usually if you're going to go out and get an edge rusher, especially somebody to complement Aiden Hutchinson, and if you're really going to try and fill that need, which has been just like, an absolute hole for the longest time now, I feel like you would have to trade towards the very top of the draft, and I just don't necessarily see that happening. The most smoke that I've seen around a particular prospect has been offensive tackle from Alabama named Caden Proctor. A lot of people are saying that among offensive line prospects, he has the most potential of all of them. I guess he hasn't just fully developed yet. Maybe that's in size and maybe some, more technical areas. So he's kind of in mock drafts, he's kind of at the point where the Lions would pick. And I've also seen it reported that if he gets to the point where the Lions are in the draft, number 17, he is not making it past that point. So I would keep an eye on him. Another one that I would look at, and I mean, as I said, looks like the Lions are looking for offensive tackle and edge rusher, but you mentioned the secondary. And another name that I think could fall to the Lions potentially in the second round, who is a talent that very likely is a first round talent. So we could be looking at a similar situation to the Brian Branch situation a couple of years ago, where they just got an absolute steal when they probably shouldn't have. That is D'Angelo Pons, cornerback out of Indiana. I've watched his tape. Very sticky, really great intangibles. His PFF grade is extremely high. I believe an 89.9, which for a guy that it looks like he's falling into the mid second round, that's pretty high. And so like I really like this kid. Cornerbacks are very hard to project. Of course, you mentioned Jeff Okuda, which was just an absolute miss. Terrion Arnold to this point. I still think Terrion Arnold has some great intangibles, but his biggest problem has just been keeping his hands off of guys,
Yeah.
just penalized like crazy. So I still think there is, potential for Terrion to grow, but you mentioned Branch is going to be hurt for at least like, potentially half of the season. There's really no indication on how long Kirby's going to be hurt for or how badly. Like he could start the season with the Lions, he could miss the entire season. It's totally up in the air at this point, at least from what I've seen. But I definitely agree with you. I think that adding some talent to the secondary is a big need. And D'Angelo Pons, if he falls to the Lions in the second round, I think that would be a great grab for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I have my prediction, and we'll talk more about that in the betting segment. And thankfully, not that it would have mattered, but it's actually none of the guys that you just mentioned. It was somebody that was picking up a little bit of smoke this week from the local media. And I just, athletically, I feel like Brad Holmes sort of has a type. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, looking forward to it. Obviously, things start up on Thursday. I agree with you, man. I feel like there's a little bit less juice to this draft. And maybe it's because, I don't know, a few years ago it was in Detroit. So, like, I think that was probably the moment where it peaked. And that was, coming off of a NFC Championship game appearance. It's maybe just not as big a deal, but it's every bit as important to the future of this team. A team that right now is, has a fair amount of question marks and had a down and disappointing season a year ago. And I think a good draft will go a long way into getting people to believe that they're on the up and up once again. I will be back. Austin, I'll let you run point for segment number 4. It'll be our All Say This segment. And we're going to be talking about a Tigers minor leaguer who is off to a red hot start. And at least on my Twitter feed has been brought up as a potential guy that needs to be called up. That is, well, I'm not going to spoil it. We'll be back. You can probably guess, but we'll be back. Segment number 4. It is Big Play Detroit. All right. It is time for the I'll Say This segment. And after you pose this, Austin, I actually have a question just because I want to set up the parameters of what you're saying. But it is time for our I'll Say This segment. Austin, I do want you running point. What is today's I'll Say This?
I'll say this. Max Clark will be a Detroit Tiger by next month.
Okay, let me just add,
because I'm curious. Again, yeah.
I want to set up the parameters. By next month, so you're saying not in a month. You mean at some point in May, he will be a Tiger?
Yes.
Okay. Continue.
Once the calendar turns, I believe Max Clark will be a Detroit Tiger. And here's kind of why. Like, starting the season, I did not think he was actually even that close. Like, I thought he was closer to maybe being put in double A again, rather than making the Detroit Tigers out of camp. Kevin McGonigal, of course, showed us everything that he had, and he absolutely earned that spot. But, Clark hadn't developed nearly as well as McGonigal had in the minor leagues last season, and he was struggling in spring training a bit. Actually went, I don't want to say viral, but semi-viral. Some people were picking on him online, and for most of it, it was just absolutely ridiculous. It was about, wearing the chains and struggling in camp, which is just ridiculous to me. But so far this season in AAA, he's hitting over 350. His OPS is over 900. He is swiping bags. He is getting extra base hits. And, he's showing everything that you would want to see out of somebody who is, one of the top prospects, not just in your organization, but in baseball. And, look at where the Tigers are at right now. Parker Meadows got hurt, broke his arm, had to have stitches, had surgery, right? He was your starting center fielder. Your next two guys that you would probably be looking at are Wenzel, who they did call up, and a lot of people wanted them to call up Max Clark then, but I feel like it was a little bit too early. And of course, with Wenzel, like, you want to give him a chance. Like, a lot of people, maybe thought that he deserved a shot out of camp. They went with Parker instead. This was Wenzel's chance to prove what he can do. He hit a pretty big home run, but other than that, he has been, dead silent in terms of offensive production. Matt Vierling has not looked great, has not done a whole lot. And maybe it's just me. I don't know if you've seen anything, but just like at the plate, he looks more uncomfortable to me than he has in years past. I don't know if maybe he hasn't fully recovered from the injury that he had. Maybe, he just wasn't able to bounce back properly from that. But his numbers are not fantastic either. Your best choice in center field as of this moment is Javier Baez, which is a wild thing to say. But his offensive stats have been decent, solid so far this season. And I saw a comparison done online. Apparently his offensive output is like noticeably better when he plays center field as opposed to shortstop. I don't think, there's really any reason for that. I think that's kind of just coincidental. But, for some guys, that thing can kind of matter. Like if he's able to relax more playing center field and put most of his focus and effort into hitting, maybe that makes a difference. But we have other guys struggling right now too. Spencer Torkelson having some major issues at the plate. If you're able to shift Keith over to first base, rearrange some parts on the defense, and then you have a spot out for Max Clark in center field, this is a guy that he's fast. He's a five-tool player. He's got, just about everything that you would want. Coming out of spring training and last season, I didn't think he was there yet. I didn't think he was ready, but he is, he's doing everything you'd want to see from him so far at the beginning of this season to warrant a call up. And I think we're on the verge of that happening. So sometime in May, I think we're going to get to that point.
I'm going to agree with you on this. And I've gone back and forth with it, but I think that we've set up this kind of perfect storm, and you laid it out pretty well. One, Max is just off to a red hot start in AAA. And that's really where it begins. Like, we wouldn't be talking about it like this if he was hitting 240 down there. He's getting on base. He's making electric plays. He's running the bases exceptionally well. He's showing all the tools, like you said, of being a tremendous future, star potentially in this league. So that's step one. Step two, and I think this is the bigger thing, is that now that the Parker injury happened, and you feel bad for Parker, but let's just be calling business for what it is. Parker wasn't exactly putting up gangbuster numbers. You are now in a position where you basically have that last spot on the roster, maybe even more than that are totally up for grabs right now. Wenzel, I'll take it one step further. Not only did he just hit that big home run, that's his only hit, I believe, since being called back up. He might have had one more. But besides that, he's been, we're splitting hairs at that point. He's been pretty dreadful. You just called up Hao-Yu Lee. Not going to give up on anybody based on 2 games, but he looked pretty overwhelmed in his first 2 outings at the big league level. Again, you got to give him some time. Torque is the big one, because 2 years ago, and I feel like history is on the verge of repeating itself, Torkelson comfortably, like without any competition, made the team out of camp. By June, he was in the minor leagues. I'm not saying we're there yet, but I think that similar to 2 years ago with Justin Henry Malloy, and I think it's even, bigger now with Clark, if you have a guy down there that can't keep himself from being called up, you're going to eventually call him up. And I think that window at some point in May, I think that's a good window of opportunity for Max. I think that's kind of what they were looking for to begin with. I also think that some of this, not all, but some of this is a little bit amplified because people made way too big a deal out of what happened in spring training. And I wrote a whole piece about this. The fact is, I don't care if you're a guy who's going to have a cup of coffee at the big league level or you're a first ballot Hall of Famer. Max Clark had a few days, mainly one in spring training, that every Major League Baseball player has. And it's amplified because it's him, and there's the showiness and the polarization. I understand all of that, but there's never been a moment where I felt like, oh, this guy's going to not work out. I think that they've done a good job with his development. He's incredibly confident. He's very smart at the plate. There's a lot to look forward to with him. I think within the next month, we will see Max Clark here in some capacity, probably starting in the outfield. We're going to be back for segment number 5. It's Fact or Fiction. We're going to mix it up a little bit. And this was an idea that I sent Austin, and I'll run with this one because I wrote it with a specific person in mind. We'll be back in just a second. All right, we are back. Segment number 5. It is time for our fact or fiction. I'll take this one, and then at the end, obviously, Austin, you want to add your opinion. Of course, you are welcome to. But it's fact or fiction this week. Fact or fiction? It's okay to give a rival team's player a standing ovation. Now, there are multiple instances in which that would potentially be warranted, but I wrote this specifically with one guy in mind. And it's Jose Ramirez of the Cleveland Guardians. Now, I want to make something very clear. I don't know if there's any athlete in my life that I can think of more moments in which they've tortured my team than Jose Ramirez. He is the Tiger Killer to me. I know in the past generation, it was probably Jim Thome. You could say Nelson Cruz. To me, when it's a divisional guy that you see a billion times a year, we've had to play him twice in the playoffs, I think of J-Ram. Like, he is the guy. And he is most likely, it looks like with his contract being what it is, going to play his whole career in Cleveland. Meaning that at some point, and golly, he's been in his prime for like 10 years now, but at some point, he will have his final season and will play his final game at Comerica Park. And that's where I, got this segment from. Would it be okay if Tiger fans in that moment, and it's not just exclusive to J-Ram, you could say this about any great player, give him a standing ovation? I'm going to say fact here, but it's facts with certain caveats. I've been pretty consistent with this. I'm never going to hate an athlete solely because they destroy the team that I root for. Their job is to go out and perform. I wouldn't expect them to say, oh boy, Chris Castellani in Michigan is going to be really upset if I bat 300 against these guys. I'm going to swing and miss at a few pitches. Like, that's just not how competition works. That's not how being an athlete works. I will criticize you and I will dislike you if you get in legit trouble for something and don't show much remorse. Like, if you have, multiple instances of cheating against the sport or getting in trouble for stuff, that's step one. That's a big one. 2, you openly mock the city that you're playing against. If you take shots at Detroit, regardless of your performance, I'm not going to give you an ovation. And 3, if you never beat my team or in high pressure moments, you didn't come to play, I'm sorry, but I lose a lot of respect for you. Just from a rival standpoint. I think the Michigan State comp is very fair. Like, Cassius Winston is one of the great college players I've ever seen. But even beyond just the respect I have for him as a person, as a player, and what he did against my squad, it's undeniable. Like, I was terrified to play Cassius Winston because he was that good. And ultimately, tons of respect for the guy because he was the final boss at the end of the video game that Michigan just couldn't seem to get through for a few years there. In this particular instance, J-Ram will likely do something that almost never happens anymore. He's going to play his whole career in one spot. He's going to end up being a Cooperstown player. When he inevitably takes that final step off of Comerica Park for the last time, I would see myself giving him a nice ovation. And there are many other instances of this, like in the NBA when LeBron plays his final game against the Pistons, standing O. Like, I'm not doing this all the time. I wrote it with J-Ram in mind, but I also know that Detroit fans have it, and I mean this is a positive, have a tendency to be a little bit petty. And I think that there may be some pushback here on my end. So you're welcome to disagree with me per usual, Austin, but where do you stand on this? Because we've been to games together. We've never had quite an instance like this, but do you fall on the fact side or are you more fiction with this one?
I'm gonna go with fact question mark, kind of like your answer last week.
Yeah.
Like I agree with you, but like in my gut, like I wouldn't feel good about doing that. We're talking about rivals specifically, right? Like if someone like Mike Trout came to the Dish or whatever
Yeah.
their last time, like I'd give him a standing ovation, no problem whatsoever. But we're talking about J-Ram, Cleveland Guardians, Tiger Killer. That would hurt a little bit. I think the circumstances kind of matter, right? Like, do we know it's his last at bat? Does he announce his retirement, beforehand? What is there a divisional race going on, between the Guardians and the Tigers, all that kind of stuff? Or, maybe he's chasing, I don't want to say MVP, but it seems like, he's consistently at least in those talks, and of course, Miguel Cabrera back in 2012 got a standing O from the rival crowd in Kansas City once he was taken out and it was confirmed that he had won the Triple Crown, which I greatly respected the Kansas City crowd for. As a Tigers fan, despise J-Ram, but as a player, of course, endless respect for him. And as a human being, like he hasn't done anything to make me not like him. Like he has a good character, and that ultimately is what matters most to me. Even if you play for a team that I despise, if you have good character, then I will. I mean, you just mentioned Cassius Winston as a Michigan fan. That's a perfect example. So. If the circumstances called for it and everyone else in Comerica Park was giving him a standing O, I might kind of, be kind of sluggish about it, maybe be the last one to get out of my seat and like clap the quietest out of everyone else there. But, he's earned it as a player and as a human being, I think. So I'll go fact. I'll go fact on this one.
Yeah, no, that's fair, man. And I think a lot of interesting discussions to be had about it. Very intrigued to see what the fans of Big Play Detroit and obviously the fans of Detroit in general are going to think about this topic. All right, we will talk here in just a second. For the final segment, it is going to be our gambling segment. It's brought to you by FanDuel here. We will bring that up in just a second, and then we will exit and give you our social media plugs and get on out of here. FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right, turn $5 into $250 in bonus bets just for getting started. And when every possession matters in the playoffs, we got NBA playoffs coming up. That includes the Detroit Pistons locked into that 1 seed. FanDuel makes it very easy to get closer to the action. From player props on your favorite stars to all the tools you need to back them up, FanDuel puts player research right at your fingertips so you can check stats, trends, and matchups all in one place and make your picks with confidence. It's everything you need all in one app. So don't miss your shot. Head to FanDuel.com/BigPlay to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Ages 21 up for select states for Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino. 18 plus in D.C., Kentucky, Wyoming. First online real money wager only. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which cover 7 days after receipt. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org/chat. For Connecticut, visit mdgamblinghelp.com. For Maryland, visit gamblinghelpma.org. Call 327 5050. Massachusetts, call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. Text HOPE-NY for New York, and call 1-877-770-7867 for Louisiana. All right, final segment, betting segment, brought to you by FanDuel. A few segments ago, we talked about who the Lions might draft, and obviously there's a few names on the board. There's quite a few names on the board, and I brought up secondary help, and I think that I didn't bring up offensive line stuff just because to me that's such an obvious one. Like this is the beginning of an offensive line that needs rebuilding, and I think is going to be a question mark regardless of what they do in the draft, honestly, coming into the 2026 season. But there's a little bit of smoke this week. Jermod McCoy, cornerback from Tennessee, remarkable athlete, missed all of last season with an ACL injury. Currently on FanDuel, the odds for the Tigers. You see, it's that time of year, man. Everything's just getting mixed up. My apologies. The odds of the Lions taking a cornerback with their first pick are plus 260. The best odds currently are for an edge rusher at plus 210. Here's why I think McCoy makes a lot of sense. First of all, there is a chance that he goes before 17. I've seen him in that 12 to 15 range, but I think, and I brought it up earlier, Brad Holmes sort of has a type when it comes to what he takes in these early rounds. Brad Holmes loves athletes, and we have seen him multiple times to his benefit overshoot, according to prognosticators, on certain guys simply because he believes in their athletic ability. No one had them taking Jahmyr Gibbs when they did, and they took him, and it worked. Same with Laporta. Same with some of these other guys. He loves the athletic types, and I think he trusts this coaching staff that they can be able to do something with him. You mentioned earlier, and we've talked about it already, but there's these massive question marks already with the secondary, with Arnold just in terms of performance, with Joseph and Branch in terms of injury. I also think and maybe it's a smokescreen. We've seen this around draft season, especially because Holmes likes to keep things kind of tight to the chest. But there's some media members locally who I trust who brought up the fact that this guy has met with Detroit in the last week. Austin, you said that there's a possibility maybe of them moving up. If that were to happen, I could totally see McCoy being a guy that they move up for. And just the last thing, because I mentioned it a second ago, ACL injury, missing the 25 season. There will be people who look at that, and he could end up dropping in the draft because of it. But Brad Holmes had zero issue taking Jamison Williams, who was fresh off of an ACL injury when they drafted him. I mean, he got his injury in the national championship game. They knew he was going to miss a good chunk of the 2022 season as a rookie, and Brad Holmes still loved him because he fell in love with the intangibles. I think something very similar could happen for the 20-year-old out of Tennessee. All right, so that will do it for this show. Should have a fun week to recap next week as the Lions go through their draft. Hopefully the Tigers continue to roll. It is officially April in the D in full swing as we got multiple teams in the regular season, multiple teams in the postseason, and a team like the Lions that is continuing to assemble their chess pieces, so to speak, here in the draft. So that will do it. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. I'm on TikTok as well at Chris Castellani. Find Big Play Detroit at Big Play Detroit on Twitter. We are on TikTok as well. Continue to support everything that we do there, and CastellaniContent.com being updated all the time with the content that Austin and I create. It is a backlog archive of all the post-game videos. You have the opportunity now. I can't go an episode without mentioning it. Michigan Wolverines won the national championship in basketball. If you want to go back and watch all 40 post-game videos, or technically 39, one unfortunately I had to miss because of sad circumstances, you can watch them all on CastellaniContent.com right under Michigan basketball post-games. So continue to support what we do. Thank you very much to the people at Big Play. Austin, let's get your plugs and let's get out of here.
Yep, I'm at Austin Sisler on X, at Austin Sisler _20 on Instagram. And if you happen to have a business or something you would like to promote or sponsor on our show, feel free to reach out to either Chris or myself.
Yes, I always forget that, but I appreciate you adding that plug. Yeah, we'll be back next week as we continue to roll. And real quick, this won't be the last time I say it, but shout out to our social people as well who continue to cut clips. That is something that took us a long time when we were still doing I'll Say This. So you are saving us a ton of time, and we'll continue to collaborate with you as well. Thank you so much to the fans who continue to support this show as we continue to try to get this thing off the ground. Very much appreciate y'all. We will talk again real soon. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.